Third Discourse, concerning oracles. After dinner we returned to the labyrinth. I was pensive in my pity for the Comte's madness, which I fully realized would be hard to cure. Prevented my being as much amused at all that he had told me as I should have been, could I have had any hope of restoring him to reason. I kept searching antiquity for some counter-arguments for which he would be unable to refute on my adducing the opinions of the Church. He had declared that he cared for naught save the ancient religion of his fathers the philosophers, and to seek to convince a Gabalis by reason would be a long-winded undertaking. Besides, I was not anxious to get into a dispute with a man whose motives I did not yet as altogether understand. It crossed my mind that what he had said concerning the false god, for whom he had substituted the sylphs and other elementary people, might be refuted by the pagan oracles whom Scripture everywhere calls devils and not sylphs. But not knowing whether the Comte might not in the tenet of his Kabbalah attribute the answer of the oracles to some natural cause, I believed that it would be to the point to make him explain what he thought about them. He gave me an opportunity to broach the subject when before entering the labyrinth he turned towards the garden. "This is very fine," he said, "and these statues are rather effective." The cardinal, who had them brought here, I replied, had a fancy little worthy of his great genius. He believed the majority of these figures to have been given forth oracles in bygone days, and paid exceedingly dear for them on that account. "And that is a failing of many people," the Comte rejoined. "Everyday ignorance causes a very criminal kind of idolatry to be committed, since people preserve with such great care and consider so precious those very idols which they believe the devil formerly employed to make himself worshipped. O God, will people never in this world know that thou hast precipitated thine enemies beneath thy footstool from the birth of time, and that thou dost hold the demons prisoner under the earth in the vortex of darkness? This unpraiseworthy desire to collect these counterfeit instruments of the demons might become innocent, my son, if people would let themselves be persuaded that the angels of darkness have never been allowed to speak through the oracles." "I do not believe," I interrupted, "that it would be easy to establish that hypothesis amongst the antiquarians, but possibly it might be among the free thinkers. For not long ago it was decided by the leading minds of the day, in a conference called for that purpose, that all these pretended oracles were either a fraud due to the avarice of the Gentile priest, or but a political trick of the sovereigns. Was this conference held and this question thus decided by the kings of the Mohammedan embassy sent to your king?" "No, sir," I answered. "Then of what religion are these gentlemen?" he retorted, "since they set at naught the Holy Scriptures which make mention in so many instances of so many different oracles, especially at the Pythian oracles, who made their abode and gave forth their replies in places destined for the multiplication of the image of God." "I mentioned all these ventriloquists," I answered, "and I reminded the company that King Saul had banished them from his kingdom, where notwithstanding he found one of them on the evening of the day before his death, whose voice had the wondrous power of raising Samuel from the dead in answer to his prayer and to his ruin. But these learned men did not alter their decision that there never had been any oracles." "If the Scripture made no impression upon them," said the Comte, "you should have convinced them by all antiquity, wherein it would have been easy to point out 1,000 marvelous proofs. There were so many virgins pregnant with the destiny of mortals, who brought forth the good and bad fortunes of those who consulted them. What do you allege as to the Chrysanthemum, Origen, and Oecumenius, who make mentions of the divine men whom the Greeks called Ingastramith, whose prophetic abdomens articulated such famous oracles? And if your gentleman did not care for the Scriptures and the Fathers, you should have reminded him of those miraculous maidens of whom the Greek Sanias speak, who changed themselves into doves, and in that form delivered the celebrated oracles of the dove of Dodona. Or else you might have said, to the glory of your nation, that there were of old in Gaul illustrious maidens who transformed their entire appearance at the will of those who consulted them, and who, in addition to the famous oracles which they delivered, had a wonderful power over the waters and the salutary authority over the most incurable disease. They would have treated all these fine proofs as apocryphal," said I. "Does their antiquity render them suspect?" he rejoined. "If so, you had only to adduce the oracles which are still delivered every day." "And in what part of the world?" said I. "In Paris," he replied. "In Paris!" I exclaimed. "In Paris," he repeated. "Art thou a master of Israel, and knowest not these things? Do not people daily consult aquatic oracles in glasses of water and basins, and aerial oracles in mirrors and on the hands of virgins? Do they not recover lost beads and pilfered watches? Do they not learn from distant countries in this way and see the absent? Ah, sir, what are you saying, said I. I am recounting that which I am positive happens every day, he answered, and it would not be difficult to find 1,000 eyewitnesses of it. Well, I cannot believe that, sir, I returned. The magistrates would not make an example of such culprits, and people would not be permitted idolatry. Ah, how hasty you are, interrupted the Comte. There is not so much evil in all this as you might suppose, and Providence will not permit the total destruction of that remnant of philosophy which has escaped the lamentable shipwreck truth has sustained. If there yet remains among the people any vestige of the dread power of the divine names, are you of the opinion that it should be blotted out, and they should lose the respect and recognition due to the great name, Agla, which works all these wonders, even when invoked by the ignorant and sinful, and which, spoken by a Kabbalist, would perform many other miracles? If you had wished to convince your gentlemen of the truth of the oracles, you had only to exalt your imagination and your faith, and turning towards the earth, cry aloud, "Ah!" Sir, I interposed, I was careful not to advance that kind of argument to such proper folk as those with whom I was debating. They would have taken me for a fanatic, for depend upon it, they have no faith whatever in that sort of thing. And even if I had known the Kabbalistic procedure to which you refer, it would not have succeeded when pronounced by me. I have even less faith than they. Well, well, said the Comte, if you lack faith, we shall supply it. If you had reason to believe, however, that your gentlemen would not credit that which they can see any day in Paris, you might have cited a story of rather recent date. That oracle which Silius Rhodiginus says he himself witnessed delivered towards the end of the last century, by that extraordinary woman who spoke and predicted the future, by means of the same organ as did the oracles of Plutarch. I should not have cared to cite Rhodiginus, I answered. It would have seemed pedantic to do so. Moreover, they would certainly have told me that the woman was beyond question a demonic. They would have said that very mnemonically, he replied. Sir, I venture to say, notwithstanding the Kabbalistic aversion to monks which I perceive you to entertain, I cannot help siding with them on this occasion. I believe that there would not be much harm in absolutely denying that oracles ever existed, as there is in saying it was not the devil who spoke through them, because, in short, the fathers and the theologians— because, in short, he interrupted, do not the theologians agree that the learned Sambith, the most ancient of the Sibyls, was the daughter of Noah? What has to do with that? I retorted. Does not Plutarch say, he rejoined, that the most ancient of the Sibyls was the first to deliver oracles at Delphi? Therefore the spirit which Sambith harbored in her breast was not a devil, nor was her Apollo a false god. For idolatry did not begin until long after the division of languages. For it would be far from the truth to attribute the father of lies, the sacred books of the Sibyls, and all the proof of the true religions which the fathers have drawn from them. And then, too, my son, he laughingly continued, it is not for you to annul the marriage of David and the Sibyl, who was made by a celebrated cardinal, not to accuse that learned personage of having placed side by side a great prophet and a wretched demonic, since either David strengthens the testimony of the Sibyl, or the Sibyl weakens the authority of David. Sir, I exclaimed, I entreat you again to become serious. Willingly, said he, provided you will not accuse me of being too much so. Is it your opinion that the devil is sometimes divided against himself and against his own interest? Why not, said I. Why not, said he, because that which Tertullian has so felicitously and so grandly termed the reason of God does not find it fitting. Satan is never divided against himself. If therefore follows either that the devil has never spoken through the oracles, or that he has never spoken through them against his own interest, and therefore if the oracles have spoken against the interest of the devil, it was not the devil who was speaking through the oracles. But, said I, has not God been able to compel the devil to bear witness to the truth and to speak against himself? But, he answered, what if God has not compelled him to do so? Ah, in that case, I replied, you are more in the right than the monks. Let us look into this matter, then, he continued, that I may proceed invincibly and in good faith. I do not care to introduce the evidence concerning oracles cited by the fathers of the Church, although I am aware of the veneration you entertain for these great men. Their religion and the interest they took in the matter might have prejudiced them and seen truth to be rather poor and naked in their own time. Their love of her might have caused them to borrow from falsehood's self-some robe and ornament from truth's adornment. There were men, and consequently capable of bearing false witness, according to the maxim of the poet of the synagogue. I shall therefore take a man who cannot be suspected of such a motive, a pagan, and a pagan of a very different kind to Lucretius, or Lucian, or the Epicureans, a pagan thoroughly imbued with the belief that there are gods and devils without number, immeasurably superstitious, a mighty magician, or supposedly so, and consequently a great partisan of devils, namely Porphyros. Here are word for word some oracles which he reports. Oracle. Above the celestial fire there is an incorruptible flame, ever sparkling, source of life, fountain of all being, and principle of all things. This flame produces all, and nothing perishes save that which it consumes. It reveals itself by virtue of itself. This fire cannot be contained in any place. It is without form and without substance. It girdles the heavens, and from it there proceeds a tiny spark which makes the whole fire of the sun, moon, and stars. This is what I know of God. Seek not to know more, for this passes thy comprehension, however wise thou may be. Nevertheless, know that the unjust and wicked man cannot hide himself from God, nor can craft nor excuse disguise aught from his piercing eyes. All is full of God. God is everywhere. You will admit, my son, that this oracle is not too greatly influenced by his devil. At least, I answered, the devil in this instance rather departs from his character. Here is another, said he, that preaches still better. There is a God, an immense depth of flame. The heart must not, however, fear to touch this adorable flame, nor to be touched by it. It will in no wise be consumed by this gentle flame, whose tranquil and peaceful warmth causes the union, harmony, and duration of the world. Nothing exists save by this fire, which is God himself. It is uncreate. It is without mother. It is omniscient and unteachable. It is unchanging in purpose, and its name is ineffable. This is God. As for us who are his messengers, we are but a little part of God. Well, what say you to that? I should say of both, I replied, that God can force the father of lies to bear witness to the truth. Here's another, rejoined the Comte, which will remove that scruple. Oracle. Alas, tripods! Weep and make funeral oration for your Apollo. He is mortal, he is about to die. He expires because the light of the celestial flame extinguishes him. You see, my child, that whoever this may be who speaks through these oracles, and who so admirably explains to the pagans the essence, unity, immensity, and eternity of God, he owns that he is mortal and but a spark of God. Therefore it cannot be the devil who is speaking, since he is immortal, and God would not compel him to say that he is not. It is therefore proven that Satan is not divided against himself. Is it a way to make himself worship to say that there is but one God? The oracle says that he is mortal, since when has the devil become so humble as to deprive himself of even his natural qualities? Therefore you see, my son, that if the principle of him, who is called par excellence, the God of the sciences, exist, it cannot have been the devil who spoke through the oracles. But if it was not the devil, said I, either lying from gaiety of heart where he speaks of himself as mortal, or telling the truth under compulsion when he speaks of God, then to what will your Kabbalah ascribe all the oracles which you maintain to have been actually delivered? Is it to an exaltation of the earth, as Aristotle, Cicero, and Plutarch would say? Ah, not to that, my child, said the Comte. Thanks to the sacred Kabbalah, my imagination has not led me astray to that extent. Oh, what do you mean? I inquired. Do you consider that my opinion so exceedingly visionary? Nevertheless, its partisans are men of good sense. Not in this instance, he replied, and it is impossible to attribute to an exaltation all that happened in the oracles. For example, that man in Tacitus, who appeared in a dream to the priests of the temple of Hercules in Armenia, and commanded them to make ready for him hunters equipped for the chase. Up to this point exaltation might account for it, but when those horses returned in the evening jaded, and their quivers emptied of shafts, and when the next day exactly the same number of dead beasts were found as there had been arrows in the quivers, you will perceive the exaltation could not have produced this effect, much less the devil. For to believe that the devil has been permitted to divert himself by chasing the hind in hair is to have been an irrational and unkabbalistic idea of the misery of the enemy of God. Then said I, to what cause does the sacred Kabbalah ascribe all of this? Wait, he answered, before I reveal this mystery to you, I must overcome any prejudice you might have because of this hypothetical exaltation. For, if I remember aright, you cited Aristotle, Plutarch, Cicero with emphasis. You might likewise have cited Iamblichus, who had very great genius, though he labored for a time under this delusion, but speedily relinquished it when he had examined the matter at close range in the Book of the Mysteries. Peter of Aponus, Pombonatius, Lavinius, Cyrenius, and Lucilius Vanina were also overjoyed to find this subterfuge in some of the ancient writers. All these pseudo-geniuses who, when they treat a divine thing, say rather what pleases them than what they know to be true, are unwilling to admit that there is anything superhuman in the oracles, lest they should acknowledge the existence of something superior to man. They fear lest man should make of the oracle a ladder wherewith to mount to God, whom they dread to acknowledge as manifesting through gradations of his spiritual creatures, and they prefer to manufacture a ladder to descend into nothingness. Instead of mounting towards heaven, they delve into the earth, and instead of seeking in being superior to man the cause of those transports which lift him above himself, and restore to him a kind of divinity, they weakly ascribe to impotent exaltations. This power to penetrate the future, discover hidden things, and attain to the supreme secrets of the divine essence. Such is the misery of man when possessed by the spirit of contradiction, and the disposition to think differently to others. Instead of achieving his ends, he becomes involved and fettered. These intellectual libertines do not wish to make man subject to substances less material than himself, and yet they make him subject to an exaltation, and disregarding the absence of any connection whatever between his chimerical vapor and the soul of man, between this emanation and the future events, between this frivolous cause and these miraculous effects. The mere singularity of their theories is to them sufficient evidence of their reasonableness. They are content to deny the existence of spirits and to assume the role of free thinkers. Then, sir, is singularity exceedingly displeasing to you? I asked. Ah, my son, said he, 'tis the bane of common sense, and the stumbling block of the greatest mind. Aristotle, great logician though he was, could not avoid the snare in which the passion for singularity leads those whom it unbalances as violently as it did him. He could not, I say, avoid becoming entangled and contradicting himself. In his book on the generation of animals, and in his ethics, he says that the spirit and understanding of man came to him from without, and cannot be transmitted from father to son. And from the spirituality of the operation of man's soul, he concludes it to be of a different nature to that of composite materials which it animates, the grossness of which only serves to becloud speculation, and is far from contributing to its production. Blind Aristotle, since you maintain that the matter of which we are composed cannot be the source of our spiritual thoughts, how can you expect a weak exaltation to be the source of sublime thought, and of those soaring flights of spirit achieved by those who gave forth the Pythian oracles? See, my child, how forcibly this genius contradicts himself, and how his craving for singularity leads him astray. You've reasoned very logically, sir, and I, enchanted to perceive that he was talking excellent sense, and hoping that his madness would not prove incurable, God willing. Plutarch, so sound in other respects, he said, interrupting me, moves me to pity in his dialogue concerning cessation of the oracles. Convincing objections are raised which he is in no wise refutes. Why does he not answer what is said to him, namely, that if it is the exaltation which causes these transports, all those who approach the prophetic tripod would be seized with enthusiasm, and not merely a single maiden who moreover must be virgin? But how can this vapor articulate cries through the abdomen? Besides, this exaltation is a natural cause, which must necessarily produce its effect regularly in all times. Why is this maiden agitated only when consulted? And what is more important, why has the earth ceased to breathe forth these divine vapors? Is it less earth now than then? Is it subject to other influences? Has it other seas and other rivers? Who then has stopped earth's pores or changed its natures? I wonder that Papinarius, Lucilius, and the other libertines should borrow this idea from Plutarch and cast aside his explanation. He spoke more judiciously than Cicero and Aristotle, for he was a man of great good sense, and not knowing what conclusion to draw from all these oracles, after tedious irresolution, he decided this exaltation which he believed issued from the earth was a most divine spirit. Thus he ascribed to divinity the extraordinary agitation and illuminations of the priestess of Apollo. This divinatory vapor is a breath and a most divine and most holy spirit, said he. Pomponius, Lucilius, and modern atheists do not adopt themselves readily to fashions of speech which imply divinity. These exaltations, say they, were of the nature of those vapors which infect splendics who speak languages they do not understand. Fernelius refutes these impieties rather well by proving that bile, which is piquant humor, cannot cause a diversity of tongue, which is one of the most marvelous effects under consideration, and an artificial expression of thought. Nevertheless, he decided erroneously in subscribing to Psellus, and to all those who have not penetrated far enough into our holy philosophy. For like them, not knowing where to locate the cause of these surprising effects, he imitated the women and monks and attributed them to the devil. Then whom should one attribute them, said I. I have long awaited this Kabbalistic secret. Plutarch has very well indicated, he said, and he would have been wise had he let matters rest there. Since this irregular method of expressing one's opinion by means of an unseemly organ was neither solemn enough nor sufficiently worthy of the majesty of the gods, says that pagan, and since the saying of the oracle surpassed the powers of the soul of man, they have rendered great service to philosophy. For they have established the existence of mortal beings beyond the gods, and man, to whom one can ascribe all that surpasses human weakness, yet falls short of divine greatness. This is the opinion held in every ancient philosophy. The Platonists and the Pythagoreans took it from the Egyptians, and the latter from Joseph the Savior, and from the Hebrews who dwelt in Egypt before the crossing of the Red Sea. The Hebrews used to call these beings who are between angels and man Saraim, and the Greeks, transposing the letters and adding but one syllable, call them daimones. Among the ancient philosophers their demons were held to be an aerial race, ruling over the elements, mortal, engendering, and unknown in a century to those who rarely seek truth in her ancient dwelling place, which is to say in the Kabbalah, and in the theology of the Hebrews, who possessed the special art of holding communion with that aerial people, and of conversing with all these inhabitants of the air. Now, sir, I think you have returned again to your sylphs. Yes, my son, he went on, the teraphim of the Jews was but the ceremony which had to be observed for what the communion, and that Jew Micah, who complains in the book of Judges that his gods have been taken from him, only laments the loss of little image through which the sylphs used to converse with him. The gods which Rachel stole from her father were also teraphim. Neither Micah nor Laban are reproved for idolatry, and Jacob would have taken care not to live for 14 years with an idolater, nor to marry his daughter. It was only a commerce with sylphs, and tradition tells us that the synagogue considered such commerce permissible, and that the image belonging to David's wife was but the teraphim by virtue of which she conversed with the elementary peoples. For you can well imagine that the prophet after God's own heart would not have tolerated idolatry in his own household. These elementary nations, so long as God neglected the salvation of the world in punishment for the first sin, used to take pleasure in explaining to man through the oracles what they knew of God, in teaching them how to live morally, and to give them most wise and most profitable counsel, such as are seen in great number in Plutarch and in all historians. As soon as God took pity on mankind and was willing himself to become their teacher, these little masters withdrew, hence the silence of the oracles. Then the upshot of your entire discourse, sir, I remarked, is that there certainly were oracles, and that the sylphs delivered them, and even today deliver them in goblets or in mirrors. The sylphs are salamanders, the gnomes are undines, corrected the Comte. If that be so, I replied, all your elementary people are very dishonest folk. So why do you say that? Said he. Why, could anything be more knavish, I pursued, than all these responses with double meanings which they always give? Always, he replied. Ah, not always. Did the sylphid speak very obscurely who appeared to the Roman in Asia, and predicted to him that he would one day return to Rome with the dignity of proconsul? And does not Tacitus say that the event occurred exactly as predicted? That inscription and those statues famous in the history of Spain, which warned unfortunate King Rodriguez that his indiscretion and incontinence would be punished by men dressed and armed exactly as they were, and that those black men would take possession of Spain and rule there for many a year. Could anything have been more explicit, and was not the prophecy verified by the event in that selfsame year? For did not the Moors come to dethrone that effeminate king? You know the story, and you must admit that the devil, who since the reign of the Messiah does not dispose of empires, could not have been the author of this oracle, and that it was undoubtedly some great Gabalist who had from one of the most learned salamanders. Since the salamanders love chastity exceedingly, they willingly make known to us the misfortunes who must befall mankind for lack of that virtue. But, sir, said I to him, do you consider the heteroclitic organ which they made use of for the preaching of their ethics very chaste and altogether in keeping with Kabbalistic modesty? Ah, said the Comte, smiling, your imagination is shocked, and you fail to perceive the physical reason which causes the flaming salamander naturally to delight in the most ingenious places, and to be attracted by— I understand, I interrupted. Do not take the trouble to explain further. As for the obscurity of some oracles which you dub knavery, he went on seriously, are not shadows the usual cloak of truth? Is not God pleased to hide himself in their somber veil? And is not Holy Writ, that perpetual oracle which he has left to his children, enveloped in an adorable obscurity which confounds and bewilders the proud even as its light guides the humble? If this be your own difficulty, my son, I advise you not to postpone entering into communion with the elementary people. You will find them very sincere folk, learned, benevolent, and God-fearing. I am of opinion that you should begin with the salamanders, for you have Mars in mid-heaven in your horoscope, which signifies that there is a great deal of fire in all your actions. And as for marriage, I would rather think that you should choose a sylphid. You would be happier with her than any of the others, for you have Jupiter in the ascendant with Venus in sextile. Now Jupiter presides over the air and the people of the air. You must, however, consult your own heart in this matter, for as you will one day see, a sage governs himself by the interior stars, and the stars of the exterior heaven but serve to give him a more certain knowledge of the aspects of the stars of that interior heaven, which is in every creature. Thus it rests with you to tell me what your inclination is, that we may proceed to your alliance with these elementary peoples, which are most pleasing to you. Sir, I replied, in my opinion, this affair demands a little consultation. I esteem you for that answer, he said, laying his hand on my shoulder. Consult maturely as to this affair, and above all with him who was called, in an eminent degree, the angel of the Grand Council. Go and devote yourself to prayer, and I shall be at your house at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. We came back to Paris, and on the way I led him once more to discourse against atheists and libertines. I have never heard arguments so well supported by reason, nor such sublime and subtle ideas advanced for the existence of God, and against the blindness of those who go through life without wholly surrendering themselves to a serious and continual worship of him, to whom we owe the gift and preservation of our being. I was surprised at the character of this man, and I could not comprehend how it was possible for him to be at once so strong, and so weak, so admirable, yet so ridiculous. End of discourse.